Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome. Sorry, we're just organizing ourselves here. You should be able to see this beautiful image on the screen, which is from some of the makings behind this report that we're hearing about today. If you come up to the top of your screen, you should see a button that says Annotate. And we're inviting you to click that little pencil. It might also be at the bottom of your screen. Just click that pencil and start adding some color, maybe some new patterns into this design, and we can make a bit of a co-creation together as we open up the session and more people join us. So grab a pencil, welcome. Let's get creative. That's the the theme of our session today. Wow, I'm seeing some butterflies already.
My son is looking more and more like a spider with every
It does look a bit like a spider.
ray of sunshine.
Welcome everyone who's just joining us. Great that you can make it. We're just annotating this beautiful image here in the screen as you join. If you go to the top or the bottom of your screen, you should see a pencil that says Annotate. You should be able to grab that and perhaps add some colors, some new patterns, something else to the screen to create together. And we'll just get started in a couple of minutes as people join us. Thanks for being here. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're just taking a moment to get creative and to use the annotate function, which is at the top of your screen or perhaps the bottom. Feel free to add some colors, some new patterns to the design we have here. See some beautiful butterflies getting some new patterns. I see the sunshine is developing.
Oh, thanks to whoever made that more beautiful than my initial attempt.
And apologies if I think some are having issues with the annotate function, but we are about to close this. So if it didn't work, apologies. But thanks for those who managed that it worked for. And I think, Lauren, I will pass to you as we're almost 3 minutes in. We have 42 people in the room. Welcome, everyone. And thanks for doing this together. Over to you, Lauren.
Super. Yes. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started because we do have a lot to cover today. I'm Lauren Pareter, the Creative Strategy Lead at UN Global Pulse, the Secretary General's Innovation Lab. I'm joined by my co-host today, Ruth Blackshaw, Innovation Culture and Fellowship Lead at the UN Innovation Network, as well as our moderator, Hannah, and 3 inspiring panelists, Bodhi, Claudia, and Just, who we will hear more from soon. So first, thank you all for being here with us today. We know it's a really busy moment in the year for everyone, and we hope this session will sort of be a welcome pause in the chaos. I'm going to kick off with the launch of our new research paper. We'll also hear from Ruth on the role of culture in the UN. Then I'll hand over to Hannah, who will moderate a conversation with our panelists and take us through a creative exercise. Hopefully, if there's time, we'll answer some of your questions. So yeah, a lot to get through in 1 hour. So let's get started. I'm wondering if we can share Super, Ruth. And Ruth, you can go straight to the slide with the report on it. I think that would be great.
Is that working for you?
No, it hasn't come up yet, but
Sorry,
you can keep.
there's a small glitch. It was coming up with the other thing.
No worries. We're used to glitches with Zoom. But while you work on that, I can also just go ahead and talk a little bit about the research. So yes, we've welcomed you all here today to celebrate the launch of a new UN Global Pulse research paper. titled The Most Creative Look to the Future, which explores how embracing creative practice and imagination can catalyze innovation and transformation. And this paper was seeded from our team trying to learn from and understand how colleagues in the UN and academia and government and artists themselves are already experimenting with the role of creative practice as a tool for transformation and collaboration in their work. And I promise you there's a lot already going on. But the paper offers learnings and recommendations from a range of experts who argue that creative practice can help our organizations embrace uncertainty and complexity. It can help us engage in longer timelines and inclusive alternatives. It can create a bridge between ways of knowing and between generations, and help us practice and build new infrastructures for the future. And I think it's important to note that these recommendations are not just for people who see themselves as creative or innovative, but it's a call to action for anyone who wants to reinvent their work. For example, to the data scientists and engineers who are asking, how might we reimagine our relationship to artificial intelligence in our organization? Or what story would we have to tell to get people to understand a more ethical vision for the future of AI? Really, regardless of whether you work in communications, procurement, humanitarian response, foresight, whatever, imagination has a place in your work. We also created a short workbook filled with exercises to help colleagues dig deeper into the research, and a competency model that outlines the creative behaviors and attitudes that we can model in our day-to-day work. So my final note, as I've already been speaking too long, I think that we can all admit that we live in a time that is extremely complex. We often feel like our systems are failing us. They're failing future generations. Our world is facing ecological collapse, and justice feels out of reach most days. But that also means that this is a time saturated with meaning. There's so much to reimagine, to renew, to reinvent that is better than this. And that is the invitation of this paper. How might we build the worlds we wished existed together? And for me, this challenge of reinventing our institutions and our societies is primarily a culture change one. And those who know me will have heard this spiel before, but it is not the technology that is stopping us from reimagining our organizations or ways of being in the world. We often have the technology, the ideas, and even the people to do this work, but we're faced with a culture that does not reward creativity, that does not encourage risk-taking, that does not offer us the opportunity to ask questions or challenge the status quo. And we believe that stories, imagination, and creative practice, and all that encompasses are unique tools in our toolbox that can change our mindsets, our norms, our cultures, and our way of thinking and being. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ruth, who spends a lot of time thinking about culture and networks and collaboration in the UN. So Ruth, over to you.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And welcome again, everybody. Happy to be here, as Lauren said, over at the Innovation Network, which I think we now have more than 4,000 colleagues across the system and beyond. And earlier this year, we launched our work around innovation culture specifically. Of course, it's something that comes up all the time, as Lauren just mentioned. People say, oh, we don't have the culture that supports us to be creative or innovative or to imagine new possibilities. But we really wanted to have a dedicated stream of work on that to really unpack what does it even look like? How do we start to create it together? How can we experiment and explore our way towards these cultures? So that's what we've been doing over in the innovation culture group so far. I know many of you who are here have been actively involved. We've been doing coffee chats, book club. We have done also remote office, and recently have been piloting an innovation fellowship to really bring people together and be intentional about those environments that we can create that can support ourselves to bring our whole selves to them and our whole creative potential. So that's a really exciting area of work for us, and it's been really great to see so much interest, especially in the fellowship as well. And also just wanted to mention this UN 2.0 framework, which many of us will be familiar with, which is this idea of a reimagined UN system. And something important there is this idea that we need to change the operating system if we're going to deal with the apps that we need to install. I like that metaphor of the operating system. And really, I think the culture part is essential in that. How do we create this forward thinking culture that's talked about in that agenda? So yeah, as Lauren said, also innovation, creativity very much linked, and maybe not given the space they deserve, both involving, I think, vulnerability of putting ideas out there, risk, and also that experimentation around how do we get there. So we wanted to just launch a very short poll to gauge the room with a couple of questions. So these are just to kind of understand how do people see themselves? So would you describe yourself as innovative? No, yes. Creative? No, yes. And also artistic. I'd be very curious to see what comes up. Okay, so we're getting lots of people would describe themselves as innovative, about 84%. 92% creative. We have a creative bunch in the room. Very exciting to hear that. We need a lot of creativity for the future, as Lauren said. Artistic. Okay, so 33% no, 24% not sure. 45% up at yes. Okay, interesting. So very high on the creative, pretty high on innovative, less so on the artistic. Just wanted to bring that up because I know these words can sometimes put some of us off. Also change, innovation, creativity, artist. And I just wanted to make one last point, which is around this idea of embedding artists, which I know is an idea in the report. And my invitation would be, let's embed the artists who are already here. Many people, I think, are highly creative, all of us, in fact, but maybe that part of us is not invited into our workspaces and not invited to engage with complexity and to reimagine these systems that we're part of every day. So I just wanted to leave with that thought. And I think now I pass to Hannah. Is that right? Or is it back to Lauren? Lauren's going to introduce you. Sorry, Hannah. Lauren, over to you.
Back and forth. Thank you, Ruth. Yes, now I'm excited to introduce you all to Hannah, our moderator for today's discussion. And she's also our lead author and researcher on this paper. It has been such a joy working with her. So Hannah Thomas Uose is an organizational designer, researcher, strategist, facilitator, and coach. As a co-founder of the consulting firm Align, she has worked with us at Global Pulse the last year, but also with Greenpeace International, Liberty, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants, among many others. She was previously Chief Product Officer at 350.org, co-founder of Level Up, and Campaigns and Culture Director at Echo. She is also a writer, and her debut novel, Who Wants to Live Forever, will be published in spring 2025 by Brazen Books at Hachette, which we're very excited to read. And if you like anything in this report, you should go and buy her book. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm really excited to be launching this research today and to be moderating with some of the amazing people we interviewed. Before I get to the panelists, I wanted to read a short poem because that was another idea that came up in the journey of putting this research together, the idea of interweaving art and ritual into our meeting spaces. So like Ruth said, consider this an invitation to bringing your artistic ears to this space. So this is the second verse from Every Day as a Wide Field, Every Page by Naomi Shihab Nye. And there were so many more poems to read, countless friends to listen to. We didn't have to be in the same room, the great modern magic. Everywhere together now, even scared together now from all points of the globe which lessened it somehow. Hopeful together too, exchanging winks in the dark, the little lights blinking. When your hope shrinks, you might feel the hope of someone far away lifting you up. Hope is the thing. Hope was always the thing. What else did we give each other from such distances? Breath of syllables, sing to me from your balcony, please. Befriend me in the deep space. When you paused for a poem, it could reshape the day you had just been living. I thought that was very beautiful. I hope you thought so too. Yes, Alison, beautiful, Naomi. She's an amazing poet if you haven't heard of her before. Okay, so now I would love to introduce our panelists, each of whom made a humongous contribution to this research and report and their ideas and experiences. First of all, Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay is Associate Professor in Global Culture Studies at the University of Oslo, Norway. He leads the international research group Co-Futures. Chattopadhyay is the leader of two major research projects funded by the European and Norwegian Research Councils, which explore contemporary global futurism's movements from a transmedial perspective, including literature, film, visual arts, and games. Claudia Sáenz, an international development and social innovation professional, currently leads the Inclusive Futures portfolio within the Foresight team at UN Global Pulse. She holds a Master of Science on Development Management from the American University. She is committed to decolonizing data and international development practices and promoting lifelong learning. She actively collaborates with UN colleagues and communities to co-create participatory futures and strategy design. And lastly, Joost Verwoerd is Associate Professor of Transformative Imagination at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University. Joost has a long history of leading international future scenarios work used to guide national policies across 7 global regions. In the Horizon 2020 project Creatures, Creative Practices for Transformational Futures, he led research on the evaluation and impact of creative practice. Joost also leads the research project Anticiplay, which focuses on transforming the video game industry. So even though I can't hear you all, I'm going to give a little clap of introduction to all of our panelists. Welcome, welcome. So exciting to have you here. I have a few questions, but also I'd love to invite attendees to pop your questions into the chat as things come up to you, and I will be trying to weave one or two of the things that you want to ask into our conversation. We have, quite a nice chunky amount of time now to dive into our panelists' experiences. So, first of all, I'm going to throw out quite a big question, and you can give me a nod if you want to go first, any of you. So, why are art, imagination, and creative practice critical to organizational transformation and innovation? I'm going to stare at you to see who might want to go first. Bodhi, you're giving me a smile, so I'm going to throw it to you first.
Oh well. Thank you. Thank you for putting me on the spot. Hello again. So, and this is great. I'm looking forward to diving into the whole report. I've read the draft, so I'm looking forward to the final version. I think one of the main things, one of the main reasons why I personally think creativity is important, I think that's probably more where I can contribute. I think most people work with very fixed ideas of the future. right? And I mean, a lot of the anticipatory work, a lot of the scenario work, and so on and so forth tends to be very linear. Tends to be very much, you go from point A to point B to point C, and so on. And what creativity does is that it disrupts this linearity. And I think that's also probably a point of contact when it comes to video games. That a lot of games and a lot of play is something that breaks this linearity of thinking. And when it comes to organizations, I think what has always been the case, but what is even more the case now, and I think anybody who's looking at the new AI laws will realize this, that the laws are always a case of what you would call lift and shift in the software industry. Right? That basically existing stuff is just repurposed to fit the new thing, right? And the transformations that are happening are so quick and so fast that our regulations, our policy, and all of this is always playing catch up. And I think what creativity does is that it can kind of mess this model up, because it's like you're working from the future backwards. Right. So instead of thinking, oh, how are we going to deal with this thing that has just suddenly come up, you imagine what might already be coming up, and then you work backwards from it. And I think that's the primary role that creativity plays also in any kind of transformation, including organizational transformation. And in the project that I work on, Co-Futures, I think our goal and focus has been to look at imaginaries from the so-called global south. I don't like the term, but from most of the world, let's just put it that way, most of the non-Anglophone world too, and how these imaginations of the futures are affecting transformation, if one wants to call it, locally. And that's where I think a lot of the space for creativity and play is.
Amazing. Thank you. Joost, I might throw to you as you'll also share some of this background around games and play.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think the perspective that I take on the importance of creative practice and creativity in change is that we as humans are there's a wonderful book by Stephen Duncombe who talks about that if we are going to be realistic about politics and change, we have to realize that people are creatures of dream, of myth, of fantasy, right? And that this is really true for all of us. And if you look at research on societal transformations, the deepest leverage points in systems have to do with fundamental paradigms, fundamental meaning-making systems, fundamental ways of understanding the world, values, and so on, right? And creative practice is uniquely able to speak to that level of experience individually and collectively. And I think that's crucial, right? We are living often in systems that block out large parts of our humanity and that make us pretend that we are much more limited than we are. And at the same time, political changes, ideological struggles, and so on work at that level. And if we are not engaging with that, we are missing a lot of the human experience, a lot of what drives politics, a lot of what drives change, right? So I think it's very important. And I mean, video games are just one example of that. And I think the reason why they're interesting, and I'm interested in music and all kinds of creative practice as well, as you know, I think, but is that this is a massive industry. It's bigger than film, it's bigger than music, and it is people spending little bits of time, up to thousands of hours in imagined worlds, where the art of games is agency. That's the art form, is agency and decision making, stepping into roles, playing with rules, and so on. So that's sort of like engagement with different ways of being and experiencing different ways of being is really strong in games. And at the same time, the game industry is a professional, well, it's a commercial space. So there are lots of incentives against being fully creative, explorative, pluralistic, decolonial, all kinds of things are not being done in mainstream games. And then there are many independent game studios doing truly adventurous things as well. And that's a space that I'm very interested in. So yeah, much more to say about this, but that's it for now, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, it's incredibly rich. Claudia, love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, and good to see everybody, and good to have so many people join in today. I'd like to add on from my colleagues also something that's quite important before we get to this collaboration and co-creation phase where all this creativity sparked, and I think that's where art and innovation come into, and that's reminding us of the empathy part of this human interaction that Bodhi and Yus have also mentioned. That gives us that step to go into collaboration, into co-creating, and all of the other buzzwords in a much better and healthier way. It also brings us into the perspective of other people, and I think that's what art and creativity can do. It sparks our minds. And I think, Hannah, you would remember a lot from our conversations that I don't necessarily consider myself an artist or a creative person. So this has been a learning experience for me as well. But I often do find myself trying to bring that out of people. And I think everybody plays a different role in the work we do. Sometimes our work is more strategy, desk-based, but then there's so many ways of gamifying experiences, of really understanding what to do and how to do a project differently. And I think that comes first with sparking that empathy, that creativity out of everybody else to understand how to do things differently. So that would be one of the things that I would like to focus on, the humanity part, the empathy. And also it pushes us to be more of risk takers, I think. It pushes us to expand our boundaries of seeing things in a non-linear way, as Bodhi was saying, and that also enriches the experience quite a lot more. So I'm happy to share more about that and what I've been learning in a bit, but thank you.
Yes, please. Well, I think I want to stay with you for a while, Claudia, because I wanted you to briefly describe the project that you did that we really uplift within the report that you worked on in Colombia, and bringing in, this storytelling elements, some traditional elements with the community that you're working with. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Of course. Yes, as part of Global Pulse, we had the privilege and honor of learning from so many UN colleagues. And in this case, we had a training to explain more about what foresight is within the UN system, and also doing foresight in a different way, and thinking about the strategy and thinking about futures and finding a balance between the two, which sometimes can be a bit hard to do. And with that, we encountered many colleagues, one of them being the group of UNFPA Colombia. They were already planning to support the government on how to do national planning in a different way. And they wanted to work with specific communities to integrate them, to include them more into the ways they do planning longer term. And of course, in this case, we're talking government and long term is 4 to 5 years, which is a lot. But I am happy to say that one of the results that came out of that was a new policy change. So already implying a longer and more strengthened support into thinking about futures, into doing foresight at a government level and planning level. So that's quite exciting too. And that's on the policy side. But on the project itself, we were able to work with 2 different communities, the communities in the Amazon, indigenous communities there, in Leticia particularly, and also communities in the Afro-Caribbean side, which is the Chocó side. And what we did that was quite a lot of training, quite a lot of relearning and relearning and starting all over again, testing with youth leaders that the UNFPA team had already identified and that we trained on how to connect with their own communities. So we had a lot of pause and reflect moments of, this is what we know, but what do you know, and what can we do better, and what can we do differently? And this is where the creativity, the innovation side came a lot. Lots of sticky notes, lots of writing on windows, lots of changing our plans, and even some in the moment changes as well. For example, explaining how we do futures thinking and how we do strategy. And then having colleagues and youth leaders from the Amazon saying, well, this sounds exactly like planting a seed and starting to think about the future in a different way. So how about we take those elements that you have in such a linear way and present them in a way that this metaphor is much more easily understandable for all, including myself, because I use that metaphor now for work outside of these communities, because it just reminds us that storytelling and telling examples of things are so much easier than coming with, oh yes, of course you know this model by so-and-so and that kind of thing. So it's just bringing that humanity again. And what we did was dialogues with the communities to understand what they wanted to do, what they were concerned about for the future. So Futures Dialogues, hence the project. And we learned quite a lot, but they also learned quite a lot from each other. And then there was the second step. How do we interact with them in a way that does not put pressure on them only, but balances out the conversation between the government, the UN entities, and themselves? How do we give back without being extractive? And again, that's what innovation and creativity really put a lot of strength on us and reminded us to, yes, we can challenge the conventional, we can challenge and be more risk takers, but how do we still respect others and have that empathy of not putting pressure on an unknown future or a policy change that they don't necessarily have a lot of control on? So we had lots of games, card games. Also, we did a lot of speculative futures, radio spots and different art and dances that they wanted to express in different ways from the visions that they developed themselves. And we have actually a documentary that came out of that we were able to present to them too. So again, finding different ways of exploring our results, not just through a report, a policy change, but also a documentary. Also having the youth leaders now wanting to use the same methodology for other projects they have within themselves, like mental health, for example, something that's already out of our boundaries, but that they want to carry on, which is great to see when art and strategy kind of help this point of sustainability, of continuing this project without us having anything to do with it, but then them owning it themselves, which goes back to Yu's points on agency. So quite excited about it. And I hope you all get to read a little bit more, and of course to reach out if you want to learn a little bit more about what we did there, because there's a lot of games we played with, not necessarily digital, but a lot of card games and drawings too.
It sounds amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to stay there a little bit. So you're talking about empathy, and we're talking about young people and future generations came up so much during the course of this research, of course, because we learn, we're born into this world with the capacity for play and imagination. But yeah, I wanted to maybe start to bring in what you were saying, Bodhi, as well, about being able to project into the future, and yeah, the empathy with future generations and the role that fiction might play in that as well. And I know that you've done a lot on that. And if I remember correctly, you did a project with young people and trying to tease out their visions for an alternate world. So I'd love to hear a bit about that as well.
Thank you. Yes, we did a whole exhibition, and we did that at the Intercultural Museum in Oslo. So it was me and several colleagues from CoFutures and from the museum. And we worked in this area of Oslo, which is which is an immigrant zone primarily, but it's also a zone with a lot of refugees and so on. So that's the area. So one of the pubs is called Asylum, for instance, and so on. And what we did, so the museum preserves the immigration history of Oslo. So that's kind of the idea of it. And it's set in a former prison. So we had a lot of people, primarily youth, to come in to work with us. And we basically gave them very broad ideas about the future and so on. Like, how do you, don't imagine too far, but 50 years, 100 years, and so on. We gave them some basic constraints and parameters, but beyond that, we didn't want to restrict their imagination. And always said, imagine futures of Oslo, imagine how you would want to live in the future. And they created all these different scenarios, and we had to also challenge them. For instance, the first scenario was, oh, we are going to have an underwater hotel. I mean, that is one of the most conservative imaginations that one can find in a way, but it's also extremely important because it shows the aspiration aspect of futures that a lot of people do want to get to. So we didn't want to challenge anybody on the kind of imagination that they had. We just wanted to question it. So we gave a few like, okay, how would this work? If you want to work with an, build an underwater hotel, okay, what do you do for food, or who gets to live there, right? We already know how hotels can be extremely exclusive places and so on, because Norway already does have underwater restaurants, which nobody can get a seat in. So we know how exclusive these can be. So these kinds of questions slowly led to all kinds of extremely, we did this over 3-4 years, led to extremely fun scenarios, including, anarchist takeover of the city, the hotel, and we had an alternative economic system that developed out of it. An alternative language came out of it as well, because Norway, for instance, like so many other places, is extremely concerned about the purity of the Norwegian language and how it's transforming with immigrants. So there's a term that is used, which is kebabnorsk, or kebab Norwegian, because of all these, Muslim immigrants coming in and transforming the language, right? So they're calling it kebab norsk. So they're like, okay, let's take this kebab norsk seriously and let's see what happens to the language. So we had them design, and we also then worked with artists. We worked with linguists to come up and invent this script, to work with them to invent this future script and so on. So it was a really, really crazy process, and we learned a lot. And I think there's something about, the way so much of our imagination in a way is colonized, from the images that we have, like, from science fiction movies or even simple advertisements for that matter, which create this aspirational future that everybody wants to kind of like, oh, we totally want to go there. This is what we want to live in, right? And then you begin to slowly pull those structures apart and show that these kinds of imaginations have deeply colonialist and deeply classist messages embedded in them, right? And that's a process. So we were very lucky to be able to explore this process over 3-4 years, and now this exhibition is open. So so it's a fun process, and we are now thinking of doing more of these, one in Iceland, for instance, to build on this and to think of this more as a traveling exhibition framework that we can use in different places. So hopefully more fun stuff will come out of this.
Thank you so much. Joost, I'm going to come to you for help in bringing this back down to an organizational context and thinking about creativity and play within the UN system. One of the quotes from the interview I did with you that we pulled out was, "Innovation without creativity is dead," I think you said. And I'd love to just hear a bit more from you around what are some of the obstacles to implementing creative practice and imagination in our day-to-day working lives? I think we've got a question from Alison as well around how can we practically integrate some of this into our daily work, especially if our jobs aren't traditionally creative?
All right, yeah. I think it has to do a lot with framing and where. So there's a concept in participation research that's about opening up, pretending to be closing down. Andy Sterling. The idea that you can create spaces that are nominally spaces that open up to diversity and creativity, but actually they are just used to close down possibilities. And I think that what Bodhi was talking to as well, sort of the imagination having this deeply colonial aspect there relates to that. I think that imagination is everywhere, right? We run the risk a little bit of talking about imagination like it's this wonderful thing that's going to solve everything, but the world is already constantly and completely imaginative all the time. It's just that imagination is mobilized for reinforcing the status quo, right? People are being very creative constantly and just wonderfully imaginative in their ways to reinforce existing power structures, and that's happening constantly. So in practice, imagination could almost be considered to be a force for oppression, maybe, right? So that's something to consider. And I think a starting point would be to see what kinds of imagination dominate organizations, what imaginaries dominate organizations, right? The imaginaries being this concept of sort of collective imaginations that are institutionally supported, that are collectively held and publicly performed. So what does the imagination of the public imagination of the UN look like? What does the performativity and the performance, the LARPing, so to speak, of the UN look like? What's the role of imagination already in the system? Because it's completely there. We are creatures of imagination. Everything we do is imaginative, but it might just be reinforcive. So if we can look at that, and then consider what alternatives might be like, and how alternative imaginative spaces connect to other global and regional and so on imaginaries. So other people's collective ideas about what the future could bring. That helps it. That stops it from just floating away in a sort of like bland consultant type of space where there's no sense of how it's rooted to society in the world. So I think that would be a starting point, right? And then maybe also answers or starts to answer Allison's question about how do we use this concretely? Well, I think start by looking at what is imaginative about the work that you're already doing, even if you don't consider it to be imaginative. Yeah, thanks, Bodhi. That's great. I agree. Nice to have a link to imaginaries. One thing to say about that is that there's this concept of imagination infrastructures that's also been mentioned before, and Cassie Robinson sort of championed that. We're looking at how existing imagination structures sort of reinforce current systems. So what does it mean if we look at the UN as an imagination infrastructure, or a collection of imagination infrastructures already, before we start thinking about building new ones or creating new spaces?
Yes, thank you. That is such an important contribution to this, that we are already constantly exercising our creative and imaginative muscles, and acknowledging that. Okay, so maybe a last question that I'd love to hear all of your ideas on. No idea is too wild. If you could envision a bold creative experiment within the UN system, what would you love to see prototyped? I think I did have some fun conversations about this with at least a couple of you. So I'd love to hear. Who would like to go first? Bodhi.
Okay, I can go first. I think every organization has its own limits, beyond which it doesn't want to think. And I think for me, those would be the spaces of play. For example, we've had this discussion before, Lauren. I mean, for instance, UNHCR, right? It's for refugees, right? So organizations generally tend to have ideas of how things should happen, and then they don't want to innovate beyond it. For instance, a world without refugees would make UNHCR redundant, right? So if we are going to think of, bold experiments, then we have to look at what are the organizational limits, and then create scenarios after that. What if we begin to think with things that, makes us redundant? A lot of what we do is like, simply, recreating existing power structures in different ways. The academia is a very good example of this, right? And most organizations are very good examples of this. We simply recreate the power structures that we have inhabited, and we continue those in different ways, including in our teaching, in our practices, and so on and so forth. So all organizations have limits. So for me, the boldest experiment would be think of the things that would make us and our power structures that we inhabit redundant. And, once we can do that, then perhaps we can start talking about, making structural systemic change, because any systemic change would actually make most of us redundant. So, but those are fun things to think with.
I love that. Thank you so much. Joost or Claudia, which of you would like to go next? Claudia.
Either way, if that's right. Yeah. Because the question that Bodhi proposes also has made me think quite a bit as well. And it is good to remember ourselves that sometimes there's limits that we have. Maybe taking it a little bit away from the systemic, which is what we are always talking about, and focusing on the behaviors that need to happen to get to that systemic. So once we analyze what those limits are that Bodhi was proposing, then remember to go back to the people that are part of the organization and that we work with, not for, which is something that I think within the UN I've relearned myself as a very much idealist into a real world now. It's who we're working with, and reminding ourselves of that can be a behavior change and experimental change to help us push through those bigger systemic things that we need to work on. And again, remembering, as Bodhi said, that there's limits to it. So then if there are systemic limits, what are those creativity opportunities, artistic opportunities, or innovative ways that we can do things without recreating them, but without perpetuating them? So what can we do differently? How can we do it? And really start collaborating more with each other. I would love to see more of spaces like this, spaces where we share openly about things that we're curious about, things that are different and not usually measured in a way that we're used to. So this leads me to the evaluation part as well, from the not let's say, artistic side of things. But how do we start measuring the value that it brings to take a step back before doing a project and really talking to the communities that you're working with, really understanding the historical systemic issues, really understanding what you will do once you have all of that information that then you turn into data and turn into a report. And that's also an experiment of its own, right? Really thinking about our limits, as Bodhi said, but also thinking about the work that we do now and how can we do it differently within the spaces that we have and the opportunities that we have with the people that we're doing it with. We don't have to do it from scratch. As you said, there's so much more imagination than we think. It already exists. So let's bring people together to do so. That's what's going to make our job really fun, engaging while it lasts, and while we contribute to a lot more than we think we will be able to. So that is, I guess, my still idealistic phase, but I am very hopeful and very happy for reports and for communities like this. And thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Claudia. And yeah, just a shout out to the evaluation tool that Joost just put in the chat, the Creatures Framework, which helps to measure how creative practice is used within an organizational context. And also alongside the research paper that we're launching today, we've also included a framework that will help teams to measure how they're going and implementing some of the recommendations, and a workbook as well. So this is such an important point about how do we know that we're doing it? How do we know it's going well? Joost.
Yeah, maybe to speak to that, to Claudia's point there. So the Creatures project that we've been doing for a few years, that wrapped up at the end of last year, focused partly on evaluation, and there was just such a strong sense from speaking to funders and policymakers and creative practitioners and researchers that so many people understand intuitively that creative practice is valuable for societal change, but people have a very hard time explaining why. Right. And so part of what we did with the Creatures project and the link that I just shared is this 9-dimensional analysis and sort of support based on lots and lots of interdisciplinary literature to help people explain why does it matter that people feel embodied experiences? Why does it matter that people get inspired and take work elsewhere? Why does it matter that people come together and organize themselves in new ways through the creative practice that you're doing? And that's sort of like, so my general point around all of this is, I think, especially when you're working with people who are skeptical of the value of creative practice, is to help them by framing this in the right way. So another perspective that I would like to share, that I also shared in a link a little bit up, is that this idea that deep seriousness and deep playfulness are and not opposites. So if people resist a playful, creative approach, out of a sort of like idea that, well, we should remain serious, we have work to do, blah, blah, blah. I think it's important to realize that a lot of this so-called seriousness is just sleepwalking, right? It's just going through the motions. It's just being stuck in the current systems. If we think about deep seriousness, we are talking about a sense of the sacredness and mystery of life. Lots of anger, fear, sadness that are connected to all the stuff that's going on in the world. This a sense of the impermanence of being and how precious everything is. Like that is actually being serious, right? A realization that we are living in a time of collective madness in some ways around a lot of issues. That is, let's actually be serious. And from that perspective, deep playfulness. Playfulness is a way to reframe, to play around with, to question, to subvert existing systems. And these things they're not separate, right? They move towards the same depth. And I think these kinds of reframes, so deep seriousness and deep playfulness, are not separate. This sort of work on explaining the many ways in which creative practice contributes to change helps to justify and create space for creative practice in organizations. And that's the first step, of course, because otherwise you just end up with a little niche where people are mucking around, but most people don't believe it's valuable at all, right? So there's a sort of culture change and a sort of conversation with people about do we actually believe that this is valuable, or do we just think that we're supposed to go through the motions of being creative in some corner, we have a little bit of budget for it, right? Without that sort of frame shift, I think it's very hard to build the infrastructures for an imaginative organization.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much. I feel so lucky that we've had your thinking and experience as a part of this research. I want to take this opportunity to give everyone a bit of a flavor of a few minutes of creative practice in the middle of your working day. And so I'm going to ask someone to share a slide from our accompanying workbook. And in the meantime, if attendees could grab a pen and paper or open a new document on your computers. And I'm just going to lead you through one of the exercises we have placed in the workbook, a creative visualization practice. So get your stuff together and make yourself comfortable. This is only going to last at maximum 4 minutes. So if you hate the experience, it doesn't matter. So I want you to bring to mind a time where you felt very creative, and it may well have been when you were very young, when you were a child and all sense of embarrassment had not arrived yet. What were you doing in this moment? Were you singing? Were you dancing? Why did you feel free to express yourself? And what sensations or emotions did you feel? Was it easy to do or difficult? Just the first memory that comes to mind is probably the right one. And what we're going to do is just close our eyes just for a minute or two, and making ourselves very comfortable, we're going to take some deep breaths as we revisit this moment. And really remember, how did it feel? What came alive? And what helped you access that feeling of creativity and freedom? And now saying goodbye to that moment. Just take a minute now to reflect, what advice would that young person give to you today to help you live a more creative life? And how might you bring that advice into the spaces that you live and work in today? So taking a minute just to think about that. And you can journal or draw what comes to you, any revelations. And then thinking even beyond that, what implications does this have for the young people who might be in our lives today, and how we might take their play more seriously, as Joost is saying? You know, how can we integrate their creativity and perspectives into our day-to-day work? So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to reflect, journal on that, and then we'll close this conversation and I'll pass back to Lauren. If there are any other last minute questions, please put them in the chat so we can get those answered before we close. And if there's anything you'd like to share from that visualization in the chat, please do as well, because it'd be nice to hear. And I think we have some people adding to this slide with the annotate function. So if you want to click on the pencil graphic on the lower left-hand side, you're very welcome to add your experiences to the slide. Jimmy, it's telling me become hippie. I'm intrigued. If you have anything more to share, please do. Oh, sorry, yeah, Hannah. Sorry, maybe you need the latest Zoom settings. But feel free to share anything in the chat and we'll all get a glimpse of your experience. Okay, well, I hope that there was a seed of something in there for you all, and you can download the workbook from the resource page along with the research paper and the framework. If you go on to use them, we'd really love to hear how that goes for you and any feedback. So please let us know. And I am going to pass back to Lauren.
Amazing. Thank you, Hannah, for that. What a wonderful conversation. It has left me with a tremendous sense of optimism for our possible futures and for the opportunity that we have to use creative practice and innovation to really point towards the worlds we want to invite in. So yeah, a final round of thank yous before we close today. And I think Ruth is also going to launch a little poll in case you all want to give any feedback as I go through the final bits and next steps for this work. But yeah, thank you, Ruth and the UN Innovation Network for co-hosting this webinar with us, to Hannah and our panelists, Claudia, Bodhi, and Joost, to Shanice, who led the beautiful art direction on this work, and Hoda, who also contributed to its vision and process, and to the many, many contributors who gave their experiences and time and insights to make this report a reality, and to all of you who joined us today. Again, you can find a link to the research and materials in the chat. You will also find a link to sign up for the Culture of Innovation group at UNIN, the UN Innovation Network. If you are interested in emerging topics like this and culture change, it is a really great group to be a part of, a very fun group to be a part of. They have all sorts of amazing events, and we will host a book club together with them on this very topic in 2024. Next week, we will send a recording of the webinar to everyone, as well as sort of next steps for colleagues who would like to collaborate with us on this topic and research in 2024. And yeah, I think that's it. Maybe we give you 2 minutes of your day back. But thank you again. Have a lovely end to your day, your year, wherever you are. We really appreciate that you joined us today, and we hope you took something away. Hope to see you all again very soon.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone. See you
Thanks,
soon.
everyone.
you.
Wonderful conversation. Let's keep
Thank
in
you so
touch.
much.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
Bye.